Okay, so I think we'll have some more people joining us, but we can go ahead and get started since we have so much to share with you today. Thank you again for being here. Good morning, good afternoon to some of you. It's really lovely to see you all. I'm Anna Zaros. I'm our Director of Organizational Advancement. I'm here in Minneapolis in our Hub for Nonviolence and Safety. And I'm going to help lead our time together with Tiffany and Mel. So Tiffany is our Executive Director of Nonviolent Peace Force, and Mel is one of our co-founders who has been leading a lot of really amazing work with community of practice. And we are celebrating his official retirement and are grateful that he's come now for this Nonviolence Cafe. So as we get started and a few more people join us, I'd love for you to just set the stage for us, Tiffany and Mel. Why have this Nonviolence Cafe with both of you now? Why bring us together in this way? So Tiffany, I'll let you start it off.
Great. Thanks so much, Anna. Hello, everyone. It's great to be back together in the Nonviolence Cafe community. Thank you for those of you who have been before or regular attendees, and welcome anyone who's new, who this might be your first time here. This opportunity for us to get together in this virtual space to spend a small concentrated amount of time in a collective community that's concerned and committed to activated nonviolence is a real blessing, particularly in the moment that we're in the world that we're living in. Coming together now, we have life is in cycles, and we are in chapters, and we have this very poignant moment right now where, as Anna said, we are celebrating and appreciating and loving Mel as he transitions into his retirement, and learning and to grow from and building on what he started, and with that original dream and group of people. So we really want to take this opportunity to have a great conversation with Mel, and it's the end of the year. And all of those things seem to line up, and it feels like a good moment to come together and reflect back on the end of this year, what that has mean for Nonviolent Peace Force and the work that we've done, and where we're going and what we're looking ahead at in 2024.
You know, it's fun to just scroll through and see everyone who's here, and so many people who have co-created Nonviolent Peace Force. And there's the span that I see here. I see Brother David Hartsoe and Jan Hartsoe, who David was there at 1998 when I grabbed him at The Hague and said we had to go out in the hall, and he always claims he went willingly, and I claim that I just didn't let go of him. But we got out there and started organizing, and so we have David from the beginning, and I noticed that we have Franca Egby, who is one of our new was an intern from Cameroon who just started working with us. And so we have the span, multi-generations here who have been working on co-creating NP. And that's one of the exciting things, that we keep creating and it continues to create. And, you know, I remember when in 2009, Rajiv Vora, who some of you remember, for years, he was our coordinator in Asia. And Rajiv and I were out for a morning walk one time in Colombo. This was in 2009. And if you remember, Sri Lanka was the site of our first project. And in Colombo, there is not 1 square foot of pavement that is on the same level. And there are intermittent sidewalks, but you can never count on a sidewalk. And we came around a corner and we noticed there was a woman in high heels. And we looked at each other and said, who in the world would wear high heels and walk on the streets of Colombo? And she was walking in front of us, and we were on our way to the office. And we noticed she turned down the street to go to the office, and we thought, huh. And then we noticed she went in the office. And this was, what was her name? Tiffany Easthom, who was on her way for an interview to be project director in Sri Lanka. And so that's how I met Tiffany in 2009. And boy, we were lucky to hire her, and she has stayed with us through project director in Sri Lanka, and then starting up what was then Southern Sudan, and then South Sudan, and then in the Middle East, and the Syria project, and then has really moved nonviolent peace forces into places that I'll speak for you, David, that you and I never imagined.
Thank you, Mel. Thank you, Tiffany. I always love hearing that story of how you all first met, and feels full circle to be back here today. So I want to start us off by acknowledging the space that we're in our global context. I know a lot of folks have asked us about Israel and Palestine in the chat already and in advance. So, we wake up every day to really harrowing news of violence around the world, and it feels like it's only getting worse. So, Tiffany, can you talk a little bit about the global context we're facing right now and how nonviolent peace forces work of unarmed civilian protection fits into this?
Sure. Thanks again, everybody. And I do think that sort of waking up to the harrowing news piece is an important place to acknowledge. We can't deny that that's true, and that if you're engaging any way with any kind of media, it's hard not to be impacted by that. And we certainly are having within our teams, the staff teams and the broader NP ecosystem, a lot of conversations about that. And this is our job. It's already our job to work on conflict. We've all signed up to do this. And it feels that this is a particularly heavy moment that we're going through. And the thing that really sort of helps ground us is to remember that over the long span of history, over the long span of time, is that there are tumultuous moments of change, and then there are moments of more relative stability. And we're clearly in a more tumultuous moment of change that could go on for quite some time. And to accept that, and part of the personal journey of nonviolence is also recognizing what our role is in that moment, and how we can contribute in any given period that we're in, and to recognize that no singular one of us as individuals and no singular group of us as organizations or otherwise can be the definitive answer. And the important part is that we don't get lost in the despair of it all. To feel the pain, to feel the fear, to feel the confusion, and acknowledge that it's true. We don't want to deny that and don't want to lie to ourselves, while at the same time recognizing, and from a nonviolent peace force perspective and the work that we do, that we have these very high level meta conflicts that are going on that we're all very conscious and aware of. It's getting a lot of press time, and the numbers are big. So places like Ukraine, places of course like Israel and Palestine. There's a lot going on in the lower light, not in the spotlight, where there have been multiple coups across the African continent in the last 2 years. We have ongoing situation in Sudan, so on and so forth. Real shifting power we see in Southeast and East Asia, and the potential that can be for destabilizing. And to see where this is incredibly challenging, and we can collectively feel the fear and suffering, it is the moment to lean in. As nonviolent peace force, as practitioners of nonviolence, this is not the moment to pull away, which is sometimes a feeling we want to do. We want to hide out, but it's really the moment to lead in. And we've been talking about it almost as sort of the tumultuous labor pains of birth. Is that during that very difficult period, it's scary and it's painful, and there's big change coming, but out of that comes new life. And at a moment when what we're seeing now is major shifting landscape and major moments of suffering, is that we want to lean into the space and encourage the birth and the bringing about of a new life, where we are all moving more completely towards peacefully coexisting with one another.
Thank you. Thanks, Tiffany. And speaking about persistence in these challenging times, one of the questions we received was about practices of self-care, how to be most effective in this work, what practices of self-care we draw on, and also how to get more people involved, particularly youth.
Yeah, so I mean, self-care is a question that comes up a lot. And as I said, we've been having these conversations internally. I'm sure most people on this call have been as well. And there's sort of the nesting circles or nesting dolls of self-care that we need to consider. It again, starting from the personal journey. So self-care is both for us when we consider it in the work we do, sort of the physical steps that we take around is our physical well-being taken care of? Are we taking rest? Are we eating well? Are we getting exercise? Are we doing those things? Those are the pieces that doesn't matter where you're working, what stage of life you're in. These are important, and they are the grounding elements of self-care. Are we nourishing our internal journey of nonviolence? Where it is a journey. It's forever work. It is non-linear, and we need to be able to remember, in order to externally work on these issues, that we have to start with the internal piece of that. And then one area that we've been really trying to support and encourage, particularly within the NP ecosystem, is really looking at it as collective care or a community of care amongst ourselves. And how do we be there to support one another in a way that is recognizing it's not a singular thing that any one of us can do to emerge unscathed in the face of extreme suffering, extreme change, and unsettling times, and really building up that feeling of collective care. And I wanted to take a lighter moment to bring us back to Mel's story of when we first met and tell you just two things. One, when I applied to work for Nonviolent Peace Force, some of you might know this, I had been working for Peace Brigades prior to that, and I had been looking for work, and I wanted to see what was the next iteration way I can contribute and way to learn around what was to become known as unarmed civilian protection. And when I had applied for a number of jobs and had some other opportunities, but this was the one I wanted. And one of the things I will never forget is in the job description and sort of the ideal characteristics of the applicant. One thing that was listed was a sense of humor. And that has sat with me till this very day. So this is 15 years ago. And to this day, I remember that I connected to the fact that they were bold enough that despite the work they were doing, to also be confident and bold enough to say, you need a sense of humor to be part of this. You need to be able to laugh and find joy. And I was so moved by that. I fired off that application. And that brings me to my second part, is when Rajiv and Mel were walking behind, what I recognized in them was a delightful and in their case, the way that they were in that moment, boyish energy, their excitement to be together and how much they loved each other and came together in their mutual commitment to doing and to being part of the broader world that was evolving as Nonviolent Peace Force was palpable. And when I found out that I had accidentally met one of the founders of the organization I was trying to get hired by, it was such an odd dichotomy of a moment where it was both, oh gosh, I was not expecting this. This really elevates the situation. And on the other hand, I think I'm home. I think this is the place I want to be. And so those are things I fall back on when things feel dark and scary and heavy and difficult, is those moments. And we have countless moments like that across our experiences together. Thanks, Anna.
Oh, thank you. And Mel, I want to give you some time to talk about the community of practice work, because I think this answers a lot of this question too, and is even bigger than that. So I'm going to turn it right over to you. Oh, you're on mute, Mel.
One of the things that has happened that at least I at first didn't count on, but has been very interesting, and that is the number of groups that have sprung up around the world and started practicing different forms of unarmed civilian practice and accompaniment. And right now, we know that there's at least 61 groups in the world. And that's what we know of. There's many more that are practicing some form of unarmed civilian protection or accompaniment in at least 24 parts of the world. And that number continues to grow. And it's not growing because someone's out there organizing it. It's growing because people on a very deep level are perceiving the need and understanding ways to come forth and to protect each other in a nonviolent way. And so a few years ago, as many of you know, I and a few others started looking at how can we accelerate this? How can we support those who are doing this work and broaden the practice in ways that we hadn't imagined? So we have done multiple steps of building a community of practice. And the step that we took in October was to bring together 84 people who were doing this work, or who are our community partners who are essential to this work, and some researchers, because this work is now being studied very seriously by a number of universities around the world. In fact, there's a website that's collecting both quantitative and qualitative research, documenting our effectiveness in that this works. It's unequivocal that this works in many conflict areas around the world. And so here were these 84 people coming together, and we came in hope. And we landed in Geneva on October 7th, and we landed to horror, the horror of Hamas and what they had done in Israel. And we were all moved because the chair of NP's board, Lucy Nusseibeh, is from Palestine. And she gave the opening remarks. And so we were brought in immediately. But people were not immobilized by that, because almost everyone in that room has faced and faces bloodshed a lot. There were people from the front lines of Ukraine. There were people who work under the coup in Myanmar. There are people who work in the mountains in Guatemala. So not that this was passé, but it didn't immobilize them and allowed them with a new sense of gravity to work together. And one of the things that was really remarkable to me was how people gathered together in this very modest, those of you who know me can count on the fact that it was a modest hotel where we met. And people knew each other. When they walked in, they just started connecting. They hadn't met, but they knew each other. They knew the challenges and the work and the risk that each other were taking. And so there was Moses from South Sudan, who had been imprisoned because to fight corruption, he had personally taken out a billboard to expose the government to the corruption in that country. And there was Brenda, who works in the native lands of what we call northern Michigan, to stop a pipeline from going through the Straits of Mackinac. And there was Sister Madia, who is fighting a Canadian mining company from going in Guatemala. And they were the heroes that we're never going to hear about, all coming together and working and expanding our work. And we talked a little bit about health, or about self-care. And one of the women there, a young woman from Mexico, Laura, and she works with what she calls psychosocial accompaniment. And they provide support for human rights defenders and people doing accompaniment in Latin America. But when they do this kind of support, or what we might call therapy for people who are in these very dangerous situations, and it does take a toll on us, they come at it that it's the situation that's abnormal, not the person. And that it's the person that's having normal responses to an abnormal situation of violence. And so it turns the approach to counseling upside down. And a lot of people took advantage of learning from her about taking this approach. And one other story I want to tell you, and I could spend the next few hours telling you stories about that event because it was extraordinary. But one of NP's civilian protectors, Ling Yi, who works in Myanmar, or what many people know as Burma. And he's been working under a very vicious coup that has took over 2.5 years ago. And we have a team that continues to figure out how to do unarmed civilian practice there, which is really remarkable. And he was telling about one of the things they do is accompany families and get them into the prisons to meet their loved ones who are political prisoners. And there's thousands of them. And those prisons are being guarded by the Tatmadaw, a very vicious military. And so I said to Ling Yi, how do you do that? How do you get past those guys and get families into what are really dungeons? And he just looked at me and he said, oh, I just let the soldiers know that they're not evil. Just remarkable. And, you know, we certainly as the horrendous actions of Hamas sank into us, and what they had done, and then the beginnings of the Israeli response, as we started to see that and started to grapple with that, people started looking and started to look at what are the possibilities. And there's been a couple of questions I saw from David and Jan Hartzo and Jan Kenny and others. And there's been a lot of focus on Gaza, but we can't forget about the West Bank, where there's a lot of violence that's going on as well. And there has been unarmed civilian protection that has continued there. It's primarily, very interestingly, been done by Israelis protecting Palestinians. And we are keeping a very close watch on that. At the community of practice, there were 5 organizations that have worked in the West Bank and previously in Gaza. And one of those is still active, but only Palestinians are working there. And the most recent report that we've seen is that it's become increasingly difficult even for the Israelis to do UCP. They are getting beat up and being jailed. But there might be opportunities. And so as a consortium, as a broader community of practice, people continue to look at where are those openings that might start on the West Bank, but then be served perhaps as a staging ground for Gaza. But there's many, many hurdles that would have to be passed through, including how would a group get into Israel in the first place. But those are all being questions that are being asked by the broader community of practice.
Thank you, Mel. Thank you so much. So I want to get to a question from John. He asked, how far along are we in disarming civilians around the world, particularly in South Sudan? So Tiffany, maybe you can tell us a little bit about our work in South Sudan and a story from there.
Great. Well, how are we disarming civilians is a big process. And I like to reflect on a phrase that our head of mission from the Philippines, Ronnie, who some of you know, often uses when we're talking about this, and about how weapons cannot be taken from people, but people need to be taken from weapons, need to choose to step away from them. And when we think about how we frame our work, we are near to processes that are called disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration. And there's a very formalized process. There's often a heavy political element to that process. And it's really, in some ways, very functional, literally taking weapons away from demobilizing combatants, ideally destroying them. Almost never that's true. Mostly they get recirculated. So really the shift, the way we think about it is less about actually disarming anybody, but encouraging and supporting and participating in processes that encourage folks to choose to move away from weapons. And that often is related to feeling safe and secure and confident. Even people who work in this field will sometimes confess that they have weapons at home in all parts of the world. So we have to sort of think about it from that perspective. But really concretely, when I think about sort of how do we separate ourselves from actual weapons from a voluntary place, I like to go back to our work that we have been doing in South Sudan for years, and related to setting up weapons-free zones. So how do we combine both the process and the inspiration of wanting to be in a place that has fewer weapons and therefore less likely to see really extreme violence, with an actual process that really puts that into place. So let me share just a reminder of how that came about. Our first weapons-free zone in South Sudan was set up in a state called Lakes State. So Lake State is the literal physical center of South Sudan. If you were to look at the map, put your finger on what you feel is like the actual middle center, that is where it is located. And it's a heartland of challenging dynamics, challenging inter and intra-communal violence and struggles. And within that space, a very small community, and this is going back to what can we do that we can feel good about, that is really concrete, is to not be hypnotized and paralyzed by the big and really focus on the small and functional, called Ural West, had decided that they were seeing fatalities and injuries arising from what should be fairly low level, low impact intrapersonal communal violence. And they really understood, and they came to this decision that there was just too many weapons around. So the team in Ural sat down with the community leaders who were having this conversation, and we're doing some brainstorming about how to deal with this. And ultimately what they came up with, this idea, was that they wanted to establish a weapons-free zone. And so this was going to be a civilian-led approach to setting up a weapons-free zone. What they recognized is, well, the people who were in that meeting felt like this was a good idea. There was a whole list of steps that needed to happen, and processes that needed to go into place to actually make this, to go from great idea, we all have great ideas every day, into something that was reality. So this kicked off a couple of months worth of work. We're working together with the community leaders. The team helped them map out a process what were they going to be able to do to set up a weapons-free zone. So it worked out setting about identifying, what does that mean? What do we mean by a weapon? We have police here, we have military here, and we have civilians. So whose weapons, what kind of weapons, and really identifying. So they chose a location in the village, which was the marketplace. So that was the place where the most interaction happened between the most diverse groups of people within their community, because everybody needs to come to the market, and where the risks of escalations and tensions can really emerge because you've just got population density. So they decided, let's pick a physical location that is realistic and identify that. Then they decided that the thing that they could control, and I think this is a lesson to us all, we cannot control everything, but what they could control were civilian weapons. They could not control the police or the military. That was part of their mandate, but they could control the choice of civilians coming in with weapons. So they identified that as their criteria, and then what were they going to do. So it became a long process of setting this up. then what would they do? People were coming in from rural areas, and often they have weapons when they come in, just everything from an AK-47 to a spear when they're coming into town and into the market for various reasons. And what people were not going to be comfortable not being able to know those who were safe. So then they set up a secure system, so a locker system, and they set up signage. So all entry points around going into the market place. And then came what we call the socialization phase. How does everybody know about this? So our team, and led by a woman who had worked for us, named Rachel, Rachel loved a megaphone. She loved the opportunity to speak about the work that she was doing. She believed really strongly in it, and she kept pushing and saying, we need to get just megaphones. And we were saying, just megaphones, just like, old school approach. And she said, yep, that's what we need. So we said, fine, go ahead. You've got the money in the budget. Go ahead. You can buy what you need. And she got out there, and she, together with the other members of the committee, were walking up and down the streets around the signs that they had put up that said, this town or this area is now a weapons-free zone. And we're making the announcements. And we're doing the work that you need to be able to do to get your message across directly to the people who were involved, and to be able to open up the space for conversation. So they did this, they plotted this out over the course of a week or 10 days, where they were out every day making the messaging. And then the next thing we knew, they get invited by the local military commander to say, well, what is going on out there? Why are you civilians talking about weapons? And so off they went, and they called us to let us know they had been invited to this meeting. And we asked them, are you worried? Are you nervous? And they said, no, we're so excited that they want to talk to us about this. This is the best thing we could possibly hope for. So off they went, and they set up with the military commander, who really understood and connected with them and said, we also are worried about the level of inter and intrapersonal violence, and the risk that is, and how we see that can escalate really quickly. And then we have to get involved. My soldiers, my men have to get involved to help de-escalate it. And then there's more risk to all of us. So he offered his support and brought in his friend, who was the police commander. And they ended up starting to work together. They offered them sort of a better physical layout where they could to set up locker storages or weapon storages for people coming in and assist them. And this is something that then became in an area of a country that would not have thought that this was a possible thing to do, that where the carrying of weapons had become so normalized that it was just part and parcel. I go to the grocery store and I carry a weapon, and away we go. And that they were able to make this choice as a community themselves. And of course, what they did see was a marked decrease in violent conflict within their community. And it created space both to encourage economic development. The market was doing better. More people were coming into trade. People were getting what they needed in terms of the different types of food and access to different goods, as well as there were fewer conflicts. And it gave the inspiration for what has now been replicated across all of the locations where NP works in South Sudan. And we were able to replicate that kind of work from that birth of that moment of inspiration. And I recently heard a story from a friend who lives in the US, who had been speaking to an acquaintance of hers, and realized that he was telling her that when he goes to the grocery store in the place that he lives in the US, he actually carries a weapon because he's afraid, and because he's worried that there's going to be conflict. And I thought, wow, it made me think back to this story about a weapons-free zone, about a marketplace in a tiny little village in South Sudan, and thinking about, again, when we talk about moving civilians away from weapons, and what are those base needs that cause us to move away from into something we didn't think we would ever do. Many people taking up weapons who wouldn't have done so otherwise, and reminding ourselves we've got more work to do. So have we contributed to disarming civilians? Yes. Is there a lot more work to do? Absolutely. Whose job is it? All of ours. Thanks, Anna.
Yeah, thank you, Tiffany. As you were talking, I was having that same thought. I'm like, how would I do that in my neighborhood? So the next question from Yvette has asked if there's one right way to do unarmed civilian protection. And as as many of you know, our protection work is really diverse. It's based on community needs, but it's also rooted in the same core values. So our work in the United States, for instance, is in quite a different context than many of our other locations. And even within a country, contexts are different from community to community. And yet still our efforts are rooted in nonviolence, in relationship building, and centering those most impacted. So I'm going to turn it over to Mel, because you recently attended our opening event for the Hub for Nonviolence and Safety here in Minneapolis. And I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about this work in the US in answer to Yvette, and talk about what it has meant to you to grow unarmed civilian protection in the US.
Thank you. And it is exciting to see the Hub for Nonviolence that NP and other community groups now have set up in North Minneapolis, and to be at that event that was embraced by the community. Shortly after the murder of George Floyd, I was invited to do a 2-hour presentation on our work to a group of that does work with gang members and former gang members that just is a few blocks from the new Hub for Nonviolence where Anna is sitting right now. And I was with Rosemary Kabaki, who is now the head of mission in South Sudan, and she had come to work with us. And Rosemary and I were walking up the steps that first day, and I thought, I turned to her and I said, what in the hell do we have to say to these guys? They were young guys between 16 and 24. And we walked in and they were all looking at us. And so we started with this exercise called a human barometer, where you put a statement on the screen, and then everybody who agrees goes to one wall, disagrees goes to the other wall. And then those who have different opinions set up in between. So the first statement we put up was, nonviolence is something white people tell Black people to do when white people have no intention of doing it themselves. All these guys immediately went to strongly agree. Well, that opened the conversation, and we started talking. And as a trainer, the worst thing that you can have is people who sit and say nothing. These guys were the opposite of that. We would say something and they'd say, you're full of, and they had very colorful language, but you could say, okay, well, what makes you say that I'm full of shit? And then we could talk about it. And so it was supposed to just be a 2-hour presentation. But then we started getting invited back. And then it was a regular thing every Tuesday morning. And it went on all fall. And then when election time came, these guys took responsibility for protecting the polls in North Minneapolis. Those were polls that had been targeted by President Trump, where he had arranged for members of the Minneapolis Police Union to provide so-called observation of those polls. Now, if you remember, it was the Minneapolis Police Union that was defending the killers of George Floyd. So the symbol was very, very clear. But instead, here were these guys from the community who had been in gangs, and instead they were providing unarmed protection at the polls. And there were no incidents. They were very successful. So from that, they started providing protection at the demonstrations around the Chauvin trial. And from that, 5 of them were hired by the local parochial school to provide protection and security at the school. And they went on, actually 3 of them provided security at the opening event at the Hub a couple of weeks ago. And so there's all kinds of ways that this work can be done.
Thank you, Mel. I really appreciate that. And one other context that we were asked about to share a little bit we're wrapping up our time. So I just want to make sure we have time and to talk a little bit about Ukraine. Ellen had asked for an update on Ukraine. And Tiffany, could you also talk a little bit about, we're sharing stories from this past year, but what's ahead for the next year before we wrap up?
Sure. So let me just touch on Ukraine to start with. For those of you who are there, Gilda reminded me that we started off the year, and other colleagues, with a Nonviolence Cafe, or my participation in the Nonviolence Cafes, and I was talking about Sudan and Ukraine. So because I had just recently been to both locations, and how it was a full circle moment. Now we're here at the end of the year, and wrapping things up. So in terms of Ukraine, it also makes me really reflect on how much that program has developed. It's been less than 2 years that we've been there. We went in April, 2 years ago, or 2022, with an assessment team of 3 people. And we now have a program of support and engagement that is covering more than 50% of the front line in Ukraine. So this is the internal front line, so not the international border, but the internal front line that has been identified as a result of the invasion. It shifts a little bit, but we, with our team in country, are able to provide support to communities and to the volunteer collectives and local responders at about 55%. Ukraine's a big country, so this is a big piece of geography. And really, when we think about how we opened up talking about how is there one way to do UCP, and Ukraine is a really good example of how it's flexibility and adaptability, and taking this approach is really important in a different type of context. So in the context of an international invasion, where the primary risk to physical security at this point comes from the sky, and how do we do the work that we do in there? The NP team in country has really innovated in a space of what it means to responsibly and enthusiastically and comprehensively support the most important thing, which is the local response to the local needs. The Ukraine response is really led by a dedicated, vigilant, well-organized group of civil societies and organizations that span from what were already NGOs providing NGO services, humanitarian services or development services within their own country prior to the invasion, to organizations that were fishing associations or community crafting associations who have now repurposed themselves and are taking their organizational structure and putting this into the work that we do. What we can really see most notably of what this looks like is we're setting up, similar to what we have now in Minneapolis, is what we call volunteer hubs or volunteer support hubs, because you have this disparate group of people who are really working around the clock to bring meals, to work with people together, and the folks who are doing that work are themselves at very high risk to their physical safety and their emotional and mental health, because this has been a long go. We're coming up to 2 years. So the hubs are set up. It is a combination of physical security. So we have what's called the Personal Protective Equipment Lending Program. People were going out to the front lines with no physical protection whatsoever. They were taking their private vehicles that were being damaged because the roads are not being serviced, as well as from the damages that come from being in an active conflict zone. And they had no bulletproof vests. They didn't have the helmets. They didn't have anything. So we've set up and procured personal protective equipment, and we have it's like a lending library, a lending program where local organizations can come in, they sign out the equipment, they take it to go do their work, they bring it back. We're responsible for servicing it, maintaining it, making sure that it's available. They've set up a hub, really notably in Kherson. That's an area you might have heard of. Which is one of the hardest hit areas where there's a big fight for territorial control, and the hub is set up so that it is as safe as possibly can be. So people can gather and they can do trainings, they can gather together in community, in mutual support, in a space that is reinforced in the basement of a building, all the things that you need to do for physical safety. For the first time ever, we've been able to provide an insurance benefit to volunteers volunteer collectives and organizations aren't thinking about this. They're not thinking about how do I get insurance. They're not how do I set up extended medical benefit for ourselves. They're too busy going. We've been able to secure a package for them that extends that coverage out to over 900 people who are doing frontline services who would not otherwise have it. And to be able to do that. In addition, we're doing trainings, working on how to do organizational development, trainings in unarmed civilian protection, of course, so on and so forth. And what is happening is it's creating a robust community of support and collective care in this protracted, what is becoming a protracted crisis. Now, the original question comes from, how is our work impacting the conflict? So on the meta narrative level, we have an international situation with a major power invading a neighboring country. And we must always remain humble and clear about what everybody's contributions are in these engineered power plays and what we can do. But through this process of working through the supports to the local response and the volunteer collectives and setting up these hubs, what our goal is to really create and open up space to plant seeds for what comes next. So to be able to going in at this moment and really trying to think about nonviolence is really difficult for folks. What everybody does know and is recognizing is that the level of trauma people have been exposed to is, when this is all over, this is going to sit with them as a society, as a community for years, if not generations to come. And the risk for tearing that apart, what was previously along existing fault lines or creating new fault lines between communities as they go forward and move their way out is really high. And so part of the work that we're doing is trying to really strengthen and lay that foundation of a community that, while responding to an emergent situation directly in front of them, is also preparing and planting the seeds for sustainable peace for that transition into the longer term paradigm shift. What we all hope to see is those horrible labor pains that brings about the new life of a new, more stable and peaceful era. Again, it will be a long journey, but the team is well up for it, and the community is inspirational, absolutely inspirational. Quickly, just on what's coming next for us, it's the end of the year, we can't help it, but we're thinking about going forward in the new year. What does that, it feels like a reset at all times. Our senior staff are going to gather together end of February, early March in Indonesia, which is our newest country program. We're going to take this opportunity, our senior leadership staff, to reflect. We're about halfway through our global strategic plan. So we want to take the opportunity to reflect on how that journey has been over the last 2.5 years. It's a 5-year plan, and does it still stand? And how are we going to work to achieve the goals we set ourselves, or any adjustments that we need to make for the coming 2.5 years, and setting the scene for then what comes next after that. What's the next iteration of NP's global strategic plan? We also take that opportunity to really work on our leadership skills, and to be able to do that as a team and as individuals, to make sure that we're embodying and embracing and being role models of the values that NP has been founded on and works on, as we bring that into our work and into fostering and supporting the broader NP ecosystem across all the country programs. We're also going to do a deep dive on what does NP's presence look like in Asia. Going back to our opening comments about shifting geopolitical powers, we certainly see that those situations, we see a lot of movement, an increased militarization in Southeast and East Asia, a return of the U.S. military and pretty significant force in that part of the world. And we want to do a deep dive on what is happening now, based on our analysis, based on what the indicators are, what do we think the scenarios might be coming in the coming 5 to 10 years? Where are the risks? What are those fault lines around stability, safety, and security? Ultimately, what does that mean for civilian security? What is already being done in terms of interventions, prevention, relationship building across unlikely allies? And then how can NP best service that? So that's going to be a new focus for us going forward into the new year. We are also looking at supporting the people in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The UN peacekeeping forces will be drawing down. They will have a period of time where the peacekeeping forces will be reducing. There's about almost 20,000 armed peacekeepers in the Democratic Republic of Congo at this moment. And over the next couple of years, we're going to see those numbers reduce pretty significantly. The leadership of the UN mission is really aware of what that might happen and have approached NP and asked us if we could help contribute to looking at building up unarmed civilian protection capacity to support in that transition. So we've got active development going on to go in with one of the UN agencies to really start a project that will really focus on training existing within and building up capacity within existing Congolese-led responses, sort of really taking inspiration from the work in Ukraine and building that up from there. Our work in our existing countries, Sudan, South Sudan, Iraq, of course, Ukraine, and the Asian programs, as I mentioned, will continue apace. We're really worried about the situation in Sudan. It is not getting enough attention. It is really difficult, even from an institutional perspective, to get resources enough to support the work that is happening there. We kicked off the Nonviolence Conference or call last year, talking about the launching of the women's protection teams in Darfur. If any of you were there in North Darfur, I happen to have been on site for the launching event. And just yesterday, we had a whole bunch of photos come in. And despite the situation of what's happening in North Darfur at the moment, there was a gathering of about 500 people, about 400 of them women, the rest children and men, who gathered together in honor of a period of time that we're in now that's called 16 Days of Activism on the elimination of violence against women. And they had gathered together in Zamzam refugee camp because that has changed significantly since the start of the war in Sudan last April, with a huge influx, thousands and thousands of families coming in seeking refuge in the fighting around them, and what that has meant. And so they came together to work together to celebrate their community and to recommit to being able to work together to protect themselves despite what's happening around them. And one of the leaders of one of the groups of the WPTs said, "This is the best day I've had since April 15th." And April 15th was the day the war started in Sudan last year. So when I think about what's coming forward, what's on deck for NP and what's in our future and what we're going to be working on, that's where we draw inspiration from, is to not get lost in the complexity, not get paralyzed by the fear and sadness, but remember that in all of those spaces, there's work to be done. People are doing amazing and wonderful things, and we will continue to do everything we can to support that going forward. Thanks, Anna. I hand it back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Tiffany. I know I keep going because I know I'm a part of this community with all of you working for and supporting Nonviolent Peace Force. So I'm going to turn it over to Mel to give the last word. I know folks are curious too about what's next for you, and you can wrap us up here, Mel.
Well, I have to take a breath after listening to what we're going to do. Wow. So what's next for me? I'm writing a spiritual memoir, which is a lot more work than I had imagined. And Robert Levering is here, and I remember him telling me, "You aren't going to get to this until until you stop working for NP." And he was very, very correct on that one. And so that's taking a lot of work and a lot of energy. I'm also going to do some support work with the broader community of practice. And Georgia and I have 13 grandchildren, and so I'll be spending more time with them. And we'll continue to support NP. When David and I sent out the first proposal, and as I'm writing this spiritual memoir, I went back through old files and found that original proposal that we had written. And we talked about a standing force of 2,000 unarmed civilian, we didn't call it that, 2,000 nonviolent peacekeepers, and a reserve force of 500. And so here we are 21 years ago from our official start at the convening event in India. And we certainly have a significant number. We have about 500 people. But we reached our goal. And we reached it not the way we had envisioned, thank God. But it wasn't a vertical process. It was a lateral process. It was a process of lots of other groups and lots of other people springing up and doing this work. So there are many more than 2,000 people in the world that are doing this work. And through our work with the community of practice, we're finding ways to support and to accelerate that work. Whether it be Parfait in Burundi, who really played a major role in stopping genocide during the 2020 presidential elections. And she now has started organizing for the 2025 elections. And that took just a little support work from us. I think all told, we raised $50,000. And she did major work. And a little support. I saw Alvaro was on the call a little while ago, organizing a coalition of groups doing this work in Latin America. So we can expand laterally and support. And with that, we see the variety of work that NP has, of course, a variety of ways that we apply UCP, but we also see the way that it's applied, for example, in Colombia, where they capture the space through art and create safe space through theater and through taking to the streets, doing creative activities. And so this gives tremendous space for creativity that we wouldn't have been able to do ourselves. And so we need to continue to stimulate and to support this as it continues to grow. And I was talking to one of the researchers, Dr. Rachel Julian, yesterday, and she works at Leeds Beckett University in the UK. And she said, this is the fastest growing form of protection in the world. And we're part of that. And so even though I'm going to be no longer working for NP, I'm not working for NP now in an official capacity, George and I are going to continue to wholeheartedly support NP. We are making an annual gift, and we're both retired, and so we know what that means. And I really do encourage you to make an annual gift, no matter how small. And the reason I say that is so you don't forget. I have intentions to give to all kinds of groups, but unless I make that, commitment to do an annual gift, I forget about most of them. And so there's a link in the chat, and I'm unabashed about fundraising, and click on that link. And Georgia and I have done it, and a lot of you on this call have done it. All the co-founders have done it. Link on, and please make an annual gift. And if you can't do that for some reason, at least make a one-time gift. That's going to help us. And while we do get support once we're in the field from various governments, and like the Swiss and the Dutch, although the Dutch now, as you know, have had a significant change in government, so we can't count on that forever. To start up programs, to start this hub in North Minneapolis, to do the advocacy work, to do the community of practice work, that all depends on your donations. And so we really need your support. And before I sound like a public television television pitch person, I'm going to say thanks. And I look forward to connecting you in so many ways in the future.
Thank you, Mel. Thank you, Mel. Thank you, Tiffany, both for all of your support and for thank you for sharing with us those stories. We're really grateful for the time you've spent with us, and for all of you here, we're grateful for your support and being a part of this community with us. We'll send out, if you have, this is just the beginning of a conversation or the continuation of a conversation. So if you have questions, we're here. You can email us. We love to be in contact with you going forward. And we'll send you a follow-up email with the recording link to give, which is also in the chat, and a link to give feedback on this time together. So thank you all so much, and have a great rest of your day. Bye now.